hover over HiveMind, we see that we've got one response in the response stack. So we don't have to go digging around. And we can make this response stack as complicated as we want. We can store as much information as we want. That's going to help us to gain insight at a glance. So without having to F11 into things real deeply, without having to jump around all the code, we can say, well, what happened? Well, Gary heals Beth for 5 damage, and and the amount that was passed back was 5. So if we had added a lot more information here that we're tracking, it would all be here for our use. Right? And so then if we execute that a bunch more times, go to our HiveMind, now we've got a response stack of 5. And they're all the same thing, right? And then we can hover over Gary, and we can look at his stuff. He's got one thing in his inventory. His stamina is now 10 because he did 5 things. He did 5 things, and every time he healed, it cost him 2 stamina. Versus Beth, whose stamina is still 20. So all this gives us the ability to operate at our API level, right? At our calling layer or our presentation tier. It's just the highest level possible where we can still gain insights about what's happening underneath the covers without having to dig in every time and really trace things down or track things down. So long story short and end of rant, to Stratham, great point, and yes, it is a hub, and we just saw with a little bit of code, we can add in a really powerful feature of being able to track those commands and see what happened. And it's going to be something that you can do with any application using the command pattern, not just a game. I really am writing this game on the fly, and I chose a game because it seemed like it was sufficiently complicated. Like any pattern we wanted to do, like a hammer looking for a nail, we could find that nail inside of a game. Sorry. Talking. Alright. So we continue that. And we didn't output any of those responses, we just fired them off. We didn't really care. Okay. So this is Refactor Saturday. So let's refactor at least a few things and maybe see where we might need to add some functionality. I'm going to be offline next week, unfortunately, but that'll give me some time to think about what the next pattern is going to be, and give some other people some time to watch the old videos, maybe catch up. I'm thinking it's going to be the state pattern, though. Okay. So I think offline I'm going to go through and add in these not implemented things and kind of just do some housekeeping. In the future, if I have more time, those kind of things might turn into just a long music playing, very quiet stream. But let's go for a bang for our buck. So let's go into the command line, and we have this response coming back. We've got no way to render it out to the screen. So without having to introduce any new patterns, let's just think about how we might want to do that. And so I'm going to add a new folder. I'm going to call it domain. And one thing I'm going to change later on is I ended up putting domain in model super early on. We were different people then. We were much younger. What I really meant to do was put domain as the root, but we'll live with that for right now. And I'm saying that here, I'm going to say domain, add new folder. I'm going to say game engine. And for my preference, and there's a million ways to organize things, but for my preference, I like to do domain centric designs and architecture, because when I go into different tiers and different projects, I want to go to the same place every time. Even though the contents in that space might be different depending on the project and location, I still want to be able to isolate myself to this folder. So if I come in and command line is just one presentation tier, right? We might choose to represent this game as a Facebook game or an iOS game or whatever have you, and we're going to have these different presentation projects. So when I go into any one of those, and I want to say, how is the game engine being interpreted here? I want to go into domain and game engine every time. Okay, so I've got my hive mind. Here, I'm just going to call a class called render. And this will be a good candidate in the future for our bridge pattern again, because now we've got game engine in two places. And we want to think of it like imperialism, right? So if I don't want to hurt any cultural feelings here, so I'm American, so I'll use my own dirty laundry a bit. So let's say that I'm like America or Britain had a colony in the United States. Just waving a flag and saying this is a British colony, and so we've put up the domain folder and the game engine folder as a flag to kind of say, hey, we're a game engine colony. What the bridge allows us to do, in the same way that Britain would have said, okay, that's fine, but we need to have some assurances that you're following our laws, acting in our own best interests, complying to our customs and cultures and policies and courtesies. So we're going to establish, a consulate or an embassy or a link back to Britain that we trust. So that's what the bridge pattern does. The bridge pattern says, okay, I know you want to represent the game engine, but we need to inject some sort of abstraction and link so that we don't get out of sync, so that you don't evolve into something that's terribly different from the original intention. So we'll add that at some point in the future. And as another point of architecture, if you ever see this kind of structure in something that I do anyway, it's nice to also have that expectation. You can say, oh wow, I see game engine, I bet render is going to have some interface that inherits from, or base that inherits from, that comes from the core. All right, lots of talking. Some might say too much talking. Okay. So in public class render, let's just say that I have a public static method that returns back, honestly it's void, and it's going to be draw room, and it's going to take in room content. So we made it void because we're inside the CLI, we're inside that project. So anything we do in terms of rendering, we want to output straight to the console. So what do we have in our room content? Oops. We've got a description, we've got a title, we've got a room key, which I don't really care about. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, we do. Because remember that we've got a grid. And when we draw our room, we want to show exits. A little ahead of ourselves right now because we don't really have the stuff in place. But so we want to look into our grid and say, what are our exits? And then draw them out. So, but for right now, super simple. We're going to say console dot writeLine room content dot title, console dot writeLine room content dot description. And this is where the act of rendering is costly, because let's say that we wanted to, for our next line, show all the players in the room. Well, we didn't need to query. We need to say that I expect back a list of iPlayers from the domain. Call that players. That's going to be equal to room content dot game object dot where x dot game object type is equal to game types player to list. And I'm going to cast that list to iPlayer, right? Oh, why even? Connect to iPlayer target type. Huh. Well, look at you being all smug. Okay, so this isn't quite what I want, and that is fine. Hang on real quick. They always say demoing lowers your IQ by a few points. I'm suffering from that now. Oh, that's on me. Silly, silly me. I'm casting it to a single type, and what I want to do is cast it to a list. That's what I want to do, but for right now, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do my cast someplace else. Okay. Let me back up for 2 seconds, because like any math class, when the teacher says, oh, that's not what I wanted to do, and then pulls out something you've never seen before, I do not want to be that person. Okay. So the squigglies are gone, and I want to show why. So, hey there, Iron Miner. You're coming into the meat of it. So if you have any questions, just shout out. We got about 15 minutes left, but hopefully it'll be a good show. So I've got players as a list that I'm expecting from the right side of my operation. So I go into my room content and I say, of all the game objects, which are just of type iGameObject, I want all the ones where the game object type is equal to game object type player. Then from that collection, I want to, or expression, I want to select, and I want to enumerate. So when I select, I'm enumerating over every one and performing a projection. And I'm using these words because they're the terms you're going to find when you're out there looking up this stuff. So I want to enumerate over everyone, selecting everyone, and perform a projection. That projection is going to be casting iPlayer on that type. So taking game object and boxing it up as a player. And then, so now by enumerating over all of that and creating and doing that projection, I now have a new collection. And as my last statement or predicate, I'm going to say, okay, now